Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. Human farmer fed a hungry alien baby wolf that was lost on his farm. Then days later ships arrived. The moons hung low over Callista that night, two glowing orbs casting their ethereal silver across the endless fields. The breeze carried a strange stillness, as though the land itself held its breath. Jor-El tightened his coat against the wind, boots crunching over dry soil as he made his final rounds across the edges of his homestead, a quiet man of calloused hands and worn eyes. Joran had spent the better part of his life coaxing food from alien soil on the edge of human expansion. Alone, always alone, except for the machines that buzzed and clicked around the crops like metal bees. He heard it then, a sound so soft it nearly vanished beneath the sighing of the wind. A high-pitched, fleeting whimper. Afraid, he turned, scanning the rows of harvested grain, then followed the sound, each step purposeful but wary. There, at the edge where the wheat met the dark forest, something moved. At first, he thought it was a wounded animal from the wilds, some local scavenger desperate for food, but as he drew near, his breath caught in his chest. It was a creature unlike anything native to Callista. Its fur shimmered faintly beneath the starlight, black but with a subtle sheen of indigo and silver that danced as it trembled. It was small, no bigger than a house dog, but its limbs were long, too slender, its eyes too intelligent. Those eyes met his, wide and bright like molten amber, filled with fear and hunger. Joran knelt slowly, his hands held out in peace. "Easy there, little one," he murmured, voice low and steady. "You look half-starved." The creature didn't move, but its gaze remained locked on his. He reached into the pouch at his side, pulling free a protein bar, basic, bland, but nourishing. He unwrapped it and broke off a piece, tossing it gently toward the creature. It sniffed, then, with slow, tentative movements, it crept forward and snatched the food, retreating just as fast to the edge of the brush. It chewed, swallowed, and watched him. Joran smiled and offered more. By the time the night was deep and the moons had climbed high, the creature had moved close enough to nuzzle his boots. It had eaten from his hand, licked his fingers, and curled up against his side with a sigh like a child finding warmth for the first time in days. Joran sat there for a long while, one hand resting gently on the strange pup's back. Somewhere in the sky above them, a distant star twinkled erratically like a signal lost in the void. He didn't know it yet, but that single act of kindness would change everything. Joran named the creature Mika. It wasn't a name plucked from any dictionary or database. It came to him in the early hours of morning, as he poured recycled water into a tin bowl and watched the little creature lap it up with growing trust. Something about the way Mika looked at him, as if he were more than a provider of food, as if he mattered, stirred something long dormant in Joran's chest. Mika was strange, not just in appearance but in behavior. He learned quickly that by the second day, the creature could follow Joran's movements and mimic certain gestures. He didn't bark or growl, but he chirped and warbled in soft, melodic sounds that seemed more like communication than instinct. His fur shifted colors in certain lights, displaying subtle patterns that hinted at complex biology far beyond the known species on Callista. Joran didn't care. He'd seen war, he'd seen what humans could do when they were scared of things they didn't understand. So he kept Mika a secret. The farm was far off the grid. His nearest neighbor was over 50 km away. It was easy to pretend he was just another stray, taken in from the wild, but Mika wasn't just any stray. On the third morning, Joran found the pup curled up in the engine cavity of his crop hauler, head buried beneath the hood. When he opened it to investigate, Mika jumped down, his tiny claws leaving no scratches, and looked at Joran with what could only be described as pride. The machine started without its usual sputter. For the first time in weeks, the diagnostics read all green. "You fixed it?" Joran asked, blinking. Mika chirped and wagged his long tail, then scampered into the barn like it was no big deal. That night, as the twin moons rose again, Joran sat beside the small creature on his front porch. The stars above them twinkled, brilliant and alive, and Mika leaned against him, warm and breathing steadily. Joran didn't ask where Mika had come from, or who or what might be looking for him. He just whispered, "You've got a place here, Ma, you're safe." He didn't see the sky shimmer faintly above them, or the brief distortion in the stars as three silent shapes strode closer to the horizon. He only saw Mika's glowing eyes, full of quiet wonder, as the little alien pup closed them and finally slept without fear. The dawn broke with a whisper rather than a blaze, gray clouds hanging low over the fields like damp wool. Joran stirred early as always, sipping hot tea on the porch while Mika chased imaginary shadows in the grass. The farm was alive with the quiet hum of life, wind turbines spinning lazily, irrigation drones skimming along the fence lines, the distant echo of crops being rotated by automated rigs. It was peaceful, then everything stopped. It wasn't sound that alerted him, it was the absence of it. Every drone, every tool, every system across the property froze mid-motion, lights flickering then shutting down entirely. The power grid went dead, even the wind seemed to pause. Mika's ears perked, his fur bristling with tension. He gave a low, unfamiliar growl. Joran stood, squinting up at the sky. A low rumble followed, deep and resonant, not thunder but a vibration that felt like it came from beneath his skin. Then the clouds parted. 3 ships descended with grace that defied physics, slicing silently through the mist like gods descending from a forgotten mythology. Sleek, black, and impossibly smooth, they hovered just above the treetops at the edge of the field before slowly settling into the earth without so much as disturbing a blade of grass. Joran backed toward the porch, hand instinctively reaching for the old plasma rifle mounted inside the doorway, but Mika darted in front of him, positioning himself between Joran and the ships, not in fear but in alertness. Then, to Joran's disbelief, the pup released a high-pitched chirp longer and sharper than usual. It was a call, a signal from the lead ship. A hatch opened, and the beings who emerged were not monstrous. They were tall, taller than any human and covered in coats of radiant, shifting fur, not unlike Mika's. Their forms were vaguely lupin, upright, with digigraded legs, elongated limbs, and powerful shoulders. But their faces were intelligent, regal even, with eyes like polished obsidian that reflected the world in impossible clarity. The lead figure stepped forward, every movement imbued with a fluid grace. His presence radiated authority, not aggression. He held up a hand, 4 fingers, each clawed but sheathed, and spoke in a language that was musical and complex, yet oddly familiar. Joran stared, pulse hammering in his ears. Mika responded, as the sound that came from the pup's throat was like a chorus of wind chimes over a deep drum beat, and the tall one answered in kind. Joran could only watch, stunned, as the two exchanged something far deeper than words. After a moment, the leader turned toward Joran and inclined his head, then approached slowly. The air shimmered slightly around him, and when he next spoke, the translator embedded in Joran's old wrist comp finally caught up and rendered the words in a low, resonant voice. "Human, you have given sanctuary to our young. You have saved the life of Prince Mikkel." Joran's mouth went dry. He looked down at Mika, Mikkel, who blinked up at him with an almost sheepish tilt of the head. "Prince." Before he could respond, the leader stepped closer and placed a fist over his chest. "We are the Corellin, and we are in your debt." The silence that followed was heavy, not with danger, but with the weight of meaning, of diplomacy, of an encounter never meant to happen. Joran stood on the edge of something he couldn't yet define, gripping the porch railing as if it might anchor him to reality. The Corellin warriors spread out slowly, though none of them drew weapons. Instead, they formed a gentle semicircle around Mika, their posture not protective but reverent. "Mika, no," Prince Mikkel wagged his tail once and emitted a soft chirp, less excited now and more dignified, like a child remembering his birthright. The leader extended a hand. His claws were hidden, but his strength was evident beneath the rippling muscles of his arm. "I am Commander Valen," he said, "warden of the royal hunt and guardian to the young heir. We have searched 3-star systems for him." Joran stared at the hand, then shook it. "I'm Joran Reel," he said, "just Efmer Balin's." His eyes shimmered. "There is no justice in the act of saving a life." He gestured toward one of the following figures who stepped forward carrying a sealed case. When opened, it revealed a glowing orb the size of a melon, pulsing with soft blue light and intricate circuits flowing like liquid beneath its translucent surface. "This is an airstone," Valen said. "A fusion of organic and synthetic life, our gift. It will bind with your soil, your air, your systems, and turn this place into a haven unlike any in your galaxy. A thank you for caring for one who could not speak for himself." Joran blinked. "You're giving me alien tech for feeding him table scraps and keeping him warm?" Valen's expression shifted, something between amusement and deep seriousness. "You gave him kindness when he had nothing." You showed compassion when another might have seen only a beast. To our people, that is worth more than currency. Mikkel padded over to Joran, brushing against his leg before leaping up into his arms. Joran caught him instinctively, shaking his head with a breathless laugh. You little liar, you didn't tell me you were royalty. Mikkel sneezed and licked his chin. A few of the Corellin made a sound that might have been laughter, a low, deep rumble like distant thunder. The airstone floated from the case of its own accord, rising gently and poolsing in the air. Valen raised a hand, and the orb drifted over the fields, spreading filaments of light like dandelion seeds in the wind. Where they touched the ground, the crops shimmered, the stalks stood taller, and the very air seemed to brighten. Joran watched, his heart stunned by the surrealness of it all, alien royalty, space wolves, sacred tech. And all of it had started because he fed a starving creature. Valen placed a hand on his shoulder. There is more to come, the commander said. But for now, know that you are known across the stars. Your kindness has been seen. The airstone floated lazily above the center of the field, its glow sinking deep into the soil like warmth into cold bones. Joran stood at the edge of the pasture, his boots buried in the grass, staring at the transformation unfolding before him. The very earth seemed to breathe differently now. Crops that had barely pushed through yesterday were standing proud and green. Today, wilted vines shimmered with sudden vitality. The air was thick with a scent he'd never smelled before, floral, electric, alive. And yet the strangest part was the silence of it all. The airstone didn't hum, or rather, it simply was. It was a quiet miracle unfolding under a gray, callous sky. Valen, he said, as the tall figure stood nearby, his long shadow casting over the field, the airstone has bonded to this land. Valen explained, it will respond to your needs, your seasons. It will learn the rhythms of your world and improve them. Joran squinted at the field, then looked back at him. That sounds dangerously close to sorcery. Valen tilted his head. If kindness is your magic, then this is ours. Joran snorted despite himself and rubbed the back of his neck. It still feels like cheating. The commander turned toward him with a weighty gaze. Feeding a starving soul is never cheating. It is the oldest law of life. You obeyed it without hesitation. Our world owes you more than this. Before Joran could protest, another Carolyn approached with a small device no bigger than a lantern. This will allow you to communicate with us if you choose, the officer said with a curt nod. Joran eyed the device suspiciously, then gave Mika, still perched on his shoulder like some galactic sidekick, a wary glance. That one of your toys, too? Mika responded with a delighted chirp, then leapt off and chased after a glowing dragonfly that had no business existing in Callista's ecosystem. Joran chuckled. I still don't understand why you came in person, he said, turning back to Valen. You could have sent a message, a drone, anything. Valen folded his arms. Some debts require more than transmission. The sky was starting to clear. Now the sun pushed past the clouds, and thin streaks of gold struck the airstone, setting off a kaleidoscope of refractions across the field. You're not what I expected, Joran murmured. Balin's ears flicked. Neither are you. They stood together for a time, watching the field breathe, watching Mikkel play, and in that quiet there was something neither of them said aloud. A recognition that this moment between two species, between man and cub, between the known and the impossible, wasn't just rare. It was sacred. It began with the seeds. Joran noticed them the next morning while walking through the rows with a steaming mug in hand. The crops he'd sown 2 months ago, rigid, slow-growing alien barley, had shot up in symmetrical lines. Each stalk, thick with life, harbored new growths, vines of silver-veined leaves, flowers that pulsed with slow, rhythmic light, fruit that shimmered like starlight caught in glass. He bent low and touched one of the vines. It responded by curling slightly around his finger, humming ever so faintly. Joran jerked his hand back in surprise, then let out a laugh. Great, he muttered. Now my plants are friendly. The airstone hovered above it all like a silent overseer, its glow subtler now, no longer announcing itself but working. The field no longer felt like a struggle, it felt like an extension of Joran himself. Alive and giving instead of stubborn and resisting, Mika pattered up beside him and dropped something at his feet, a glowing apple. Where the hell did you get that? Joran asked, but Mika was already trotting away, tail high and wagging. Later, Valen joined him in the barn. The towering Carolyn had traded his formal armor for something simpler, a long coat of woven strands that shimmered with faint circuitry. He inspected the tools hanging from the rafters, many of them rusted or patched together from salvaged parts. These are crude, he said, though not unkindly. They do the job, Joran replied, crossing his arms. Valen touched one of the plow handles, and a soft pulse ran along the metal. A second later, the rust vanished, the metal gleamed, and its joints straightened. It looked brand new. You fixed it, Joran asked. No, Valen said. I reminded it of what it was meant to be. Joran blinked. That's the most poetic thing anyone's ever said about my plow. The commander smiled just slightly. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking the land, Joran pointing out old scars on the property where a drought had scorched half his yield, where a windstorm had torn down his fence, where time and toil had worn the place thin. And in each place, the airstone responded, healing, nurturing, strengthening, not erasing the history but building a topography. As the sun dipped low, casting everything in bronze, Joran and Valen stood by the fence that overlooked the valley, while Mika chased fireflies down the hill, his tail leaving little trails of light in the dusk. I've lived alone here a long time, Joran said quietly. You are no longer alone, Valen replied. Joran gave a slow nod. He didn't say thank you, not because he wasn't grateful, but because the moment didn't need it. It was understood. That night he sat on the porch with Mika curled in his lap, watching the airstone drift gently overhead like a second moon. The stars were brighter, the silence softer, and for the first time in his life, Joran felt like the universe had not just taken from him, but given something back. The next day came with rain, not the usual gray drizzle that smeared the sky into dull shapes, but a warm, living rain, the kind that smelled of wildflowers and wet stone, soaking the earth without drowning it. Joran stepped out barefoot, letting the drops fall on his upturned face, and laughed aloud when Mika darted past him, already soaked and gleaming like a phantom wolf in a sea of puddles. Valen found him there, standing in the middle of his transformed field with a look of dazed joy on his face. The Carolyn commander, ever stoic, waited until the human noticed him. We are leaving soon, Valen said. Joran turned, breath catching slightly. What do you mean, leaving? We've delayed long enough. We were never meant to land here, let alone remain for cycles. The Hyakin waits for word of the young prince. But before we go, there is something we wish to offer you. A smaller ship had been dispatched from one of the larger cruisers, its curves like living bone, pulsing gently with interior light. The hatch opened, and out stepped two Corellan elders, shorter than Valen, older by centuries, their fur gone pale, their movements slow but precise. One of them extended a thin, many-fingered hand toward Joran. You cared for one of our own. You are of interest to the kinmind. We invite you to our home world, to learn from us, to teach us to stand where no human has stood. Joran's first instinct was to laugh. A dirt-stained farmer from the farthest edge of civilized space, invited to some royal alien planet as a guest of honor. It sounded like something out of the old folk hollows his father used to watch. He scratched his beard. And Mika, he is your bond now, said the elder with a tilt of the head. He has chosen. Mika trotted up just then, splashing through the mud, and plopped down beside Joran like it was the most natural thing in the world. The pup looked up at him, panting, blinking those golden eyes that held galaxies within. Joran looked down at him, then at Valen. What would I be doing there? He asked in a low voice. I'm no scientist, no diplomat. I till dirt and weld broken parts. Valen stepped forward. You understand something most of your kind does not, life's patience, simplicity. These are not small things in our world. You will not be tested, only welcomed. Joran took a deep breath. The wind tasted different today, Wilder. Knew all right, he said finally, but I'm not shaving. Mika barked in approval. Preparations took less than a day, not because Joran rushed, but because he knew what needed to be done and what didn't. He walked the fields one last time, running his hands through the impossibly vibrant stalks. They'd be fine now. The airstone hummed in tune with the land, its light pulsing in rhythm with the wind, the rain, the heartbeat of the soil. He didn't know how long it would last, years, maybe generations, but it had already done what he could never have dreamed of. The barn, the porch swing, the half-fixed generator in the shed, he visited them all, not with sadness but reverence. These things had been his world. Now they were chapters in a story he hadn't expected to finish this way. The Carolyn ships were ready. Their smooth, black hulls shimmered in the dying light, waiting without urgency. Joran packed nothing but a locket containing his parents' picture and a small tool kit, because some habits didn't die easy. Mika stayed by his side, no longer a curious pup, but something more poised, more aware, as if remembering the weight of who he was. When the moment came, Joran turned at the top of the hill and looked back one final time. The homestead sat quiet and perfect beneath the twin moons, every light still, every shadow familiar. "I used to think this place was the whole world," he said. Valen stood beside him, hands clasped behind his back. "And now," Joran smiled faintly, "now I know it was just the beginning." They boarded the ship, Mika following without hesitation, the hatch closed, sealing off the smell of soil, the whisper of wheat, the final threat of a life he had once lived alone. As the engines lifted them from the earth, Joran watched through the viewport as his farm shrank, then blurred, then vanished into the clouds. The stars welcomed him like old friends. He didn't know what waited on Ayura. He didn't need to. What mattered was that he was no longer just a farmer. He was something else now. A friend, a guardian, a man who fed a hungry creature and found the universe at his door. Aboard the Caroline vessel, the stars moved differently. Joran sat by a panoramic viewing window, watching them twist and arc across the black like molten silver, pulled into strange patterns by the ship's living hull. The vessel didn't fly so much as flow, bending through space in silence, slipping past stars and moons with the grace of a falling leaf. It wasn't like the crude jumps of human freighters. There were no countdowns, no nausea, no bone-deep groans of struggling metal. The ship sang as it traveled, a low harmonic hum resonating through the floor and into Joran's chest. At first it unnerved him, now he found it soothing. Mika was curled beside him, fast asleep, his breathing perfectly synced to the ship's rhythm. Every so often the pup would twitch, perhaps dreaming of wheat fields and wind, or perhaps of something far older, something stored deep in his alien blood. Carol and crew members passed by from time to time, some offering nods, others simply acknowledging him with a flick of their ears. They weren't cold, just formally restrained. But Joran noticed something else too, respect, not the kind given out of duty or fear, but a different, measured, earned respect. Valen spent hours each day sharing glimpses of Auroran culture through touch-sensitive memory stones that glowed with images and sensations, through tales spoken in voices older than the ship itself, and through quiet companionship. Joran was no scholar, but he listened, he learned, and he felt the weight of a civilization that valued silence over noise, reverence over dominance, life over conquest. There was no ceremony when the planet finally appeared on the edge of their vision, no trumpet of engines, no fanfare of descent, just a slow reveal of a planet of shimmering blues and deep purples, its atmosphere glinting like the inside of a pearl. It was breathtaking. Joran leaned forward, eyes wide. "That's your home." Valen stood beside him. "It is your home now, too." The ship descended without turbulence, gliding through layers of cloud into a landscape that defied understanding. Forests of silverleaf trees stretched across rolling hills, rivers glowed faintly in twilight hues, and towering spires of crystal and bone curled upward from massive cities, catching the light and scattering it across the sky like shattered stars. They landed on a platform suspended over a lake so still it looked like glass, and a crowd awaited them. Joran's hand twitched toward his belt, a leftover instinct from the past, but then Mika nudged him forward, tail wagging. Completely at ease, the gathered Caroline, hundreds of them, bowed low, not in submission but in a greeting steeped in ceremony. When Joran stepped down the ramp, he felt something shift deep within him. He was being welcomed. He, a man who once ate dinner alone in silence every night, was now seen, truly seen. The days that followed blurred into something like a dream. Joran was given quarters high in the skyward grove, a great living structure that grew from the trunk of a 1,000-year-old tree, its bark soft to the touch, its walls pulsing with gentle warmth. Mika slept curled on the ledge beside the window, tail flicking with contentment as he adapted easily to the world he had been born into. The Caroline elders called Joran by a new title, the Kinded Hand, a word they had coined in their own tongue, one that didn't mean savior or hero but something quieter, one who offers without demand, a soul of shelter. Children would follow him through the market paths, eyes wide with wonder, and farmers from the plains came to speak with him to learn of the airstone and his bond with the soil. He never pretended to be something he wasn't. He still talked like a man who fixed broken fences and coaxed tomatoes from dry ground. But his voice was listened to. One evening, as the sun dipped into the lake and lit the sky in a burning spiral of red and gold, Joran sat with a violin at the top of the windrise spire, the city glowing with bioluminescent lanterns and the sounds of laughter and wind filling the air like music. "You could have kept going, Joran," someone said, sipping from a carved cup filled with something like tea, but sweeter, thicker. You could have taken Mika home, given me the airstone, and vanished. Why stay? Valen studied the horizon for a long time before answering. Because kindness does not echo once it rings over and over. If you let it, you gave freely, so we give freely in return, not as repayment, but as continuation. Joran considered that, then looked at Mika, now fully grown and taller than he remembered, prowling the spire's edge with the confidence of royalty, but always coming back to sit beside him. You know, Joran murmured, if someone had told me I'd leave Callista, I would have laughed. I figured I'd die there, same as I lived, quiet and forgotten. And yet here you are, Valen said, raising his glass. Yeah, Joran replied, here I am. The two clinked their cups. Later, when the stars rose and the sky shimmered with the faint pulse of distant ships and auroras, Joran sat alone with Mika at the edge of the spire. The wolf leaned into him, warm and solid, and together they watched the universe unfold above them. A man who had once been alone, and a creature who had once been lost.